Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Wolf, and I'm the programming coordinator for the Osterville Village Library. Thank you so much for being with us on this absolutely stunning Saturday. And to our friends joining us on Zoom, thank you so much for being with us as well. Today, we have the honor of hosting world-renowned local author Anthony Sammarco with an exciting talk, Cranberries, New England's Bounty. Anthony Sammarco is a noted historian and author of now 90 books on the history and development of Boston, the area, historical traditions. He commenced writing in 1995, and his books, Lost Boston, The History of Howard Johnson's How a Massachusetts Soda Fountain Became a Roadside Icon, and The Baker Chocolate Company, A Sweet History, are among his many books that have made the bestsellers list. For his work in history, he has received the Bullfinch Award from the Doric Dames of the Massachusetts State House, a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Victorian Society, New England chapter, and the Washington Medal from Freedom Foundation, and was named Dorchester Town Historian by Raymond L. Flynn, at the time the mayor of Boston. He was elected a fellow of the Massachusetts Historical Society, is a member of the Boston Authors Club, and a proprietor of the Boston Athenaeum. In his volunteer work, he was treasurer of the Victorian Society New England chapter. He is past president of the Bay State Historical League and served as corporator of the New England Baptist Hospital for a decade. He is now the newly appointed incoming president of the board of directors at the Osterville Village Library. Without further ado, Anthony Sammarco.
Thank you. Well, Amy, I think you should write my obituary. But let's wait a few years. Well, it's a pleasure to see you all and to come out on such a lovely day. After I leave here, I have to mow the lawn. But the whole concept is, this is one of the series of lectures that I've been giving that deal in things that might be of interest to us, but also something that are relatively common. The month of November is when cranberries take on their new meaning. And in that instance, cranberries, which are grown not just on Cape Cod and throughout southeastern Massachusetts, but now throughout the United States, is a wonderful economic boom for any community. It's also something that is part of our history. And seen here, we see a man within a bog that has been flooded. This is in the recent decade, to see how cranberries are actually harvested. They actually come up off the vines, they're gathered with a net and eventually put into holding receivers. But the idea is that we realize that cranberries, seen here in an 18th century lithograph on the left-hand side, are a group of evergreen dwarf shrubs with trailing vines, and was called Sassamanish by the Algonquin Indians and Ibimi by the Wampanoag Indians, and it literally translates to bitter or sour berries. Native Americans ate cranberries as fresh fruit, dried the fruit and formed them into cakes to store, and made tea out of the leaves. Native Americans also used the cranberry to make dye for their rugs and blankets, and found the cranberry plant to be valuable for medicinal purposes, using it both to treat wounds as a poultice and to help prevent certain illnesses. So this is something that has a wide range and a long history with many people, not only from the Native Americans, but right through to the present. But the whole concept is the name cranberry derives from the German Cranberg. The English translation is craneberry, and the first named as cranberry in English by the Reverend John Eliot of Roxbury in 1647. He's on the right-hand side. He was somebody who was not only well-known, but well-respected. Eliot was known as the apostle of the Indians and was to found Roxbury Latin School in 1645, where I was educated. In 1660, he completed the enormous task of translating the Eliot Bible into the Massachusetts Indian language. And what was really a phonetic language would later be translated into a written language. The surprising thing is that the first book published in North America was the Bible, printed in the Indian tongue. Well, in that instance, we realize that cranberries had been known in the 17th century by the Puritan and Pilgrims who settled Massachusetts and Plymouth Bay Colony. By the latter part of the 18th and early 19th century, they took on a new meaning. This is a watercolor called Cranberry Girl, and she's picking cranberries. In the early 1800s, a sea captain and Revolutionary War veteran named Captain Henry Hall transplanted cranberry vines to his property in North Dennis, Massachusetts. And there on Cape Cod found that the cranberries did best when they received sandy soil from the nearby dunes, and soon he was producing enough cranberries to ship them to Boston and New York. So they weren't just enjoyed locally, but now they became a crop that could actually be harvested and sent to market. Well, in the early 19th century at Cape Cod, Captain Hall found that cranberries were so abundant that he sent them and did a booming business up and down the eastern seacoast. American whalers and mariners always carried cranberries on their voyages to prevent scurvy, as they had the necessary vitamin C. And as you can see here on the lower right-hand side, a late 18th century treatise on scurvy, written in 3 parts, was a great example because many people didn't have the more exotic fruits, lemons, limes, and grapefruits, also with the medicinal vitamin C. But cranberries were a local crop, and many ships, such as this one called the Comet, which hangs in my bedroom, is a great example of a ship that actually transported cranberries. Well, cranberries are indigenous to the northern United States and were enjoyed by the Native Americans and in New England long before European colonists arrived. The Narragansett and the Wampanoag actually made cranberries into sun-dried pemmican, which were basically fish cakes, and then namsay, which was grits, who combined the berries with maple sugar to create a sweet sauce, much like we do today. In addition to being an important food source, cranberries were also used to dye fabric and also had medicinal properties good for blood poisoning and poultices. On the left-hand side is an 1880 lithograph that actually shows people creating a cranberry bog. Bogs could be created. They weren't always natural to the environment. And in this instance, with the addition of sand, cranberries would thrive. During the period of the 19th century, the cranberry harvest was one of the biggest things on Cape Cod. Seen here in a print, and this dates to 1871, it shows all women picking and sorting cranberries on Cape Cod. Not only did they pick by hand, which was laborious, but they placed them into pails, and then on the left-hand side, put the cranberries into an inclined shaft where they would actually be sorted. Any leaves, stems, or even rocks would all be removed as best they could. But it became something of a ritual. And even Eastman Johnson, one of the most famous 19th century painters in the United States, painted Cranberry Pickers, Island of Nantucket in 1880. This shows in that instance that it's not just men, women, but even children that would turn out for the 4 to 5 week period after the ripening of the cranberries to pick. This was a market crop, and the more that were picked, the more that could be sold, the more the economy boomed. Well, during the period of the early 20th century, this postcard shows cranberry picking in Hyannis. I can't quite figure out where in Hyannis this is, but the whole idea is that you can see this enormous bog, and the people, of course, are of all ages. It seemed like every child would escape from school to actually pick cranberries, and it was an important feature to realize that the more cranberries you picked, the higher your salary. And in that way, we would see people actually picking within lines. Many people would go from one area to another simply because there was a bigger cache of cranberries just to the right. And because you were being paid according to the amount in your pail, they decided to do lines, and you had to adhere to the line. And it went from one end of the bog to the other. And of course, every person could then pick within that area and had an equal chance to actually make a little bit of pocket money. But the whole idea was, because it was something that brought everybody from the community to help in the harvesting, it was said that there was lots of courting that was done at the cranberry harvest. These two men hold a huge wooden barrel, and they're bringing it full of cranberries to the sorting house. But of course, you see two women staring at the man in the foreground. Well, I'm sure a marriage ensued sometime. But during that period of the 19th century, the A.D. Makepeace Company, based in Wareham, is the world's largest cranberry grower, the largest private property owner in eastern Massachusetts, and a recognized leader in environmentally responsible real estate development and stewardship. Seen here is Abel Dennison Makepeace, who was a farmer, businessman, and inventor whose lasting legacy is a cranberry empire. This was a man, just like Captain Hall, that had some land that he created cranberry bogs, and it would grow tremendously. And we would realize, and this is a photograph of about 1900, that the cranberry, along with the blueberry and the Concord grape, is one of the only three native fruits grown commercially in America. It was an important feature to realize that fruits such as this or berries could actually not only be beneficial to one's health, but they could also, in that instance, be made into other things. Blueberry pies, blueberry jam, Concord grape, wine, as well as grape jelly, and of course the cranberry into the indispensable cranberry sauce. Well, the American Cranberry Growers Association was founded in 1871, and the Cape Cod Cranberry Growers Association was founded in 1888. The harvesting of cranberries was second to the economy of southern Massachusetts, that up to 1927, children could be excused from school to work the fields during harvest time. Traditionally, cranberries grew in wetlands, and today even the man-made cranberry beds are referred to as cranberry bogs. And contrary to popular belief, these bogs are dry for most of the growing season and only flooded at harvest time. And when the bogs are flooded, the cranberries are dislodged to float to the top of the water, making it easier to collect them. Most cranberries are harvested in this way and then are processed to make dried fruit, sauce, and the official beverage of Massachusetts, cranberry juice. I always thought it was a Manhattan, but that's behind me. On the left, we see a young girl, probably no more than 9 years of age, and in her hand she has a pail, the typical accoutrement for picking cranberries. But in her right hand, she's holding a harvest scoop. And these harvest scoops were actually made by a man named George Chandler in Marshfield, Massachusetts. He called it Chandler's Improved Scoop. This was a cranberry scoop that he patented in 1906, and it looked just like this. It was made of wood, all handmade, hand carved, and we see these individual tongues that allowed the person to actually scoop up the cranberries, but along with the cranberries came vines, rocks, leaves, everything imaginable. But it was something that was less labor intensive than picking the cranberries by hand. This was something that would go through many different renditions, but Chandler's cranberry scoop was a very popular one right up until the time of World War II. And seen here, Cape Cod cranberries, which actually included at that time Wareham and Onset. It was always said to be the gateway to Cape Cod until the canal had been dug, was a great example of people actually using cranberries as a marketable commodity. The woman on the left actually has a much larger version of the Chandler cranberry scoop. But what they were doing was to create something in some ways that would be immortalized, not just as the typical Cape Cod tradition, but also something that was a vital part of the economy. This postcard is from the 1940s, and it shows Ocean Spray brand boxes on the left-hand side of the bog. In the foreground, it's all men, and they're on their hands and knees, but they're using Chandler cranberry scoops. Now, this was something that could actually take the time and effort out of picking by hand and save people well over 2 hours during an 8-hour day. But one of the things was, it was labor intensive and backbreaking. And by the 19th century, Plymouth and Barnstable counties had thousands of acres dedicated to the cultivation of cranberries. The growing and harvesting of cranberries was so essential to the economy of southern Massachusetts that up until 1927, children could be excused to work the bogs during the harvest time. Now, this little girl obviously is not a truant, but she's actually in the cranberry bog. She can't be more than 6 years of age. And her pails are filled to the brim with cranberries. This was something that was fun. And of course, you weren't in school. A cranberry bog lined off had pickers at work. And if you look at the photograph, most of them are typical Cape Codders. But within a few years, this changed dramatically because the cranberry was important in many ways to producing the community we live in today. It provided a needed source of income to families during the economically depressed times and decades following the Civil War. The cranberry industry also encouraged immigration by peoples from the Cape Verde Islands, who had been involved in New England's whaling industry on the decline in the latter part of the 19th century. And during this period, many Cape Verdeans would actually see employment within not just the cranberry bogs, but fruit picking and even cultivation of farms. It was an important way to realize as this grew, not just in economics, but in size and scale of production, more and more people were needed. Well, some of the postcards that I acquired on eBay show these young girls sorting cranberries. Well, they've picked it. We see the girl on the right with her pail of cranberries, and they place them into a wooden pallet, and they sort them, taking out the leaves, vines, and rocks, and pebbles, and things of that sort. But the idea of sorting them was something that really hadn't changed since the 18th century. It was all hit or miss, and I'm sure that things still survived within the final production. But here, these boxes on the left-hand side would be filled and checked by people before they were shipped. On the right, they're smaller and deeper, but whatever they were, long and narrow or small and high, they'd be brought by a donkey pulled wagon. And each of these individual boxes themselves, filled to the brim, would be brought to the screening house. Now, they'd already been screened on the field, but the screening house were individual freestanding buildings wherever the cranberry bogs were located. This was something that actually had living accommodations on the top floor for the person running this process. But the screener would actually be somebody who would actually create, in some ways, a better product so that it was free of all debris. On the left-hand side, we see the women actually doing it by hand. But on the right-hand side, this is a man who placed them into a huge tub, and they came through in such a way that they were free of debris. The screening houses, as you can see here, show a man pouring cranberries into a mechanical sorter that vibrates and tumbles the berries to remove stems and leaves. Notice the wood barrels on the right, made by a cooper who worked for the industry. So this was something that we would see 100 years ago. And of course, the cooper was an important feature because these barrels, which were called hogsheads, or 40 gallons of cranberries, would also have the cooper placing the lid on the top. Once they were placed onto a cart to be brought to either a railroad or the ship, they could then be sent throughout the United States. Cranberries also have a little bit of a shelf life, anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. They can be kept without any adverse effect, but then if it's over that period of time, they have to be refined and placed into something to make a sauce. But in that instance, Ocean Spray began to change the mechanical sorting. And here, the man actually has seen all of the cranberries sorted in the screen house, and this conveyor belt brings them down, and he places all of the now debris-free cranberries on this conveyor belt. And this was something that was an important feature because Ocean Spray would eventually become one of the largest producers in the United States. Well, this tablet actually shows not only the date from 1917 right up through 1935, well, 1907, I'm sorry, to 1935, but it shows that cranberries are being grown in Massachusetts, New Jersey, Long Island, and Wisconsin. And it says the value of crops based on American Cranberry Exchange average selling price per barrel. And you can see that beginning in 1907, it was about $400,000 annually, a huge sum of money. So the value of cranberries was something that was contingent, not only in their consumption, but the sale. And many people realized that cranberries, which was a very easy product to grow, would actually have all of its difficulty in harvesting and shipment. But cranberries have become indispensable. And seen here is a painting, The First Thanksgiving, that was painted by Jenny Brownscombe in 1914, and is a popular interpretation of the first Thanksgiving that has become a symbol of the holiday for many Americans. It reached a wide audience and influenced the national understanding when it was printed in Life magazine. You realize there were only 4 women that survived from the original Plymouth colony. But we see here men, the 4 women, their babies, and of course, Native Americans sitting down to an interpretation of what Thanksgiving dinner was. And what is wild turkey or venison without cranberry sauce? I can only hope that they actually served it. But there was also here, Thanksgiving Day, the dinner that was engraved by Winslow Homer and was published in Harper's Weekly on November 27th of 1858. As father carves a roast turkey and guests clink wine glasses in a toast to Thanksgiving, notice the children's table on the right, an age-old rite of passage where they would be seated until they were old enough to sit with the adults. Winslow Homer was a great engraver, and of course, Harper's Weekly was a nationally illustrated newspaper. But we would always think of cranberry sauce served in a beautiful piece of Boston and sandwich glass. But the wild turkey by John James Audubon appeared at plate number 1 in his monumental work, The Birds of America. And since the time of the Pilgrims, the wild turkey has proliferated in America, and in his book, by attempting to paint 1 page each day and painting with a newly discovered technique, Audubon paid homage to the noble wild turkey that became synonymous with Thanksgiving. It was said that Audubon was so fond of wild turkeys that he used a painting of one as his first image in his magnificent Birds of America, and he also used a miniature version in his personal seal. You probably have seen these turkeys. They seem to proliferate Osterville, even off season, but they are wild and they go throughout the community and probably one of the ugliest animals I've ever seen. But this etching shows Uncle Sam's Thanksgiving dinner, which was published in the November 20th, 1869 edition of Harper's Weekly. Uncle Sam is seen standing at the head of the dining room table on the right, carving a turkey for representatives of the diverse immigration that was taking place in the decades after the Civil War. Native Americans, African, Chinese, Irish, German, French, Spanish, Arab, and Italian. Thomas Nast idealizes dinner into an all-inclusive American feast with Columbia, the symbol of America, on the left, seated between an African man and a Chinese man. In the corners, come one, come all, and free and equal refer to the eclectic mixture of guests and represent the new America and his support of the 15th Amendment to the Constitution. I'm sure that each one of us that has an immigrant ancestor that came in the 19th century has incorporated some of the traditional favorite foods that were brought from that culture into our Thanksgiving dinner. And many people began to realize in some ways that Norman Rockwell's Freedom from Want is probably one of his most iconic paintings. And it was part of the Four Freedom series. And here it shows an elderly couple standing at the head of the dining room table as a roast turkey is placed on the table to be carved. Norman Rockwell used his own Vermont dining room as the backdrop for this famous painting. He enlisted family members and neighbors to join at the table as models, including his cook, Mrs. Thaddeus Wheaton, bless you, who was depicted serving the turkey. And this painting appeared in the Saturday Evening Post on March 6th of 1943, and since that time has become the most well-known and iconic image of Thanksgiving. But Thanksgiving would also see 2 well-dressed children to sit down to Thanksgiving dinner, admiring a huge roast turkey ready to be carved, along with the obligatory glass tray of canned jelly cranberry sauce. Ocean Spray said that the first commercial cranberry sauce was canned in 1912 by Marcus Uran, who owned cranberry bogs in Hanson, Massachusetts. Uran developed cranberry juice cocktail in 1933 and later created a syrup for mixed drinks. The famous canned cranberry sauce log we know today became widely available nationwide in 1941. And though I do serve homemade whole berry cranberry sauce, it's not Thanksgiving without a jarred can of cranberry sauce. And seen here, Ocean Spray began in the 1960s to show how you could use the cranberry sauce in a little bit different way. The new pack's ready, and as you see here, make your turkey taste better for you. Not only was it a roast turkey, but slices of oranges had stars cut out of the jellied cranberry. Not only did it look pretty, but remember, cranberries are good for the health. But during that period, even Jell-O got in on the act, and it says how Jell-O became a part of Thanksgiving. Well, this cranberry flavored Jell-O had no artificial sweeteners and no high fructose corn syrup. And as we see at that wonderful first Thanksgiving, not only the Pilgrims, but also the Native Americans are enjoying Jell-O cranberry Jell-O. Also, you could serve cranberries on Valentine's Day. 3 ways to serve cranberry hearts. Well, not only a slice of cranberry, but a heart-shaped cutout allowed you to make these individual plump sizes, 6 to the can, and you could actually serve them along with your favorite dinner for your loved one. We also began to realize that Makepeace cranberry sauce. Still, you might remember A.D. Makepeace, he sold off to Ocean Spray, would show you different ways in a little cookbook to see how cranberries, tart enough to tease, sweet enough to please, could be combined with other ingredients. And this is the rear cover. But at the top, we see a roast turkey with jellied cranberry sauce, a wonderful accompaniment. But have you ever thought of cranberry sauce along with cream cheese sandwiches? Probably not. But the whole idea is this is something that many people could enjoy at tea time. This was an important way to market it and to show the diverse ways that you could enjoy it. But Cape Cod cranberries were delicious. Not only did they come from Cape Cod, but they also came from Plymouth, Wareham, and Onset. This advertisement, probably dating to the 1920s, was a major feature and affixed to every single wooden barrel that was shipped from this area. But in that period of time, though the cranberries within every single barrel or later box of cranberries didn't differ, many of the wonderful advertisements did. Now, if you were a Mayflower descendant, of course, you would serve Mayflower brand Cape Cod cranberries. And you can see here that they were not only beautifully illustrated, but they showed the Mayflower. Great for ancestor worship, but it was also something that showed, again, a way of eating cranberries. You could also have the Priscilla brand. Priscilla and John Alden had 11 children, so there must be millions of descendants today. And many people realize, of course, that Priscilla and John Alden fell in love after he would actually court her for Miles Standish. There was also the blue parrot. And seen here, Collie cranberries, grown here on Cape Cod, but distributed only in Boston, had a blue parrot. But some of them are really quite fun. This is the Faneuil Hall brand, and you can see Faneuil Hall on the right. Originally built in 1742, it was increased in size in 1804 by Charles Bulfinch, and it was known as the Cradle of Liberty during the American Revolution. So it had a historical prototype. But if you actually were somebody who was a great reenactor, maybe you would want the Bunker Hill brand Cape Cod cranberries. And here, Bunker Hill, which was the tallest obelisk in New England, is a great example of something that marks the Battle of Bunker Hill, which, ironically, the colonists lost. But in that instance, it was something that was, again, historical. But everybody has their college. Maybe you went to Harvard and you had Harvard brand Cape Cod cranberries, and you see the seal on the right-hand side. Most people in Boston went to Harvard, but heaven forbid you had a brother-in-law that went to Yale. And the Yale brand Cape Cod cranberries were also equally delicious. But the cranberries didn't differ one iota from one box to the other. But the difference in advertising was something that made it appeal to a broader based public. And in some ways, my favorite is Santa Claus brand. Santa Claus always came, and yes, when my mother served Christmas dinner, there was roast beef, ham, and turkey, because certain people didn't eat certain things. So Santa Claus always came with cranberry sauce. Well, during that period, Ocean Spray in 1930, a group of cranberry growers, including A.D. Makepeace, formed the Cranberry Cooperative to be known as Ocean Spray in Hampton, Massachusetts. It has grown to become one of the biggest distributors of cranberries worldwide. And you can see here, it says Ocean Spray cranberries with Wisconsin Searles jumbos. Now, Hanson would see, of course, many different cranberries grown. But in the 20th century, the expansion throughout the United States, including Wisconsin, could produce cranberries. But the climate in Wisconsin was so cold that they actually could grow larger cranberries than normal, and they were called jumbos. Well, John Makepeace, seen here in the lower center, in his day grew more cranberries than anyone in the world. In 1930, with Marcus Urand and Elizabeth Lee, he founded Ocean Spray Cranberry Company, originally known as Cranberry Canners. And it was a growers' cooperative that dominated the cranberry bogs since. Cranberries are picked during a 6-week period. Before canning technology, and the product had to be consumed immediately. And the rest of the year, there was almost no market. Urand's canned cranberry sauce and juice are revolutionary innovations because they produced a product that had a shelf life of months and months instead of just days. And in that way, the women who worked in these sorting sheds, which had become much larger and employed many more people, would work from the time they arrived until the time they left by hand sorting cranberries. They have their own workstations and they push them onto the conveyor belt as they went down, and eventually would be simply put into barrels, boxes, or bags. And in that instance, the jellied cranberry sauce and cranberry juice cocktail that our parents and grandparents knew was something that was now being marketed to markets and eventually supermarkets. On the left-hand side, we see jellied cranberry sauce. In the center, whole cranberry sauce. And on the right, the tart cranberry juice cocktail. It could be enjoyed as such, or it can be combined with a series of other things to make it even more delicious. But this is an important feature because, as we see here, some cranberries would actually overflow the shipping. Makepeace served evaporated cranberries. Has anybody ever had evaporated cranberries? Well, what they are is dried cranberries. We can even get them at CVS today. But they're more convenient and economical than fresh fruit. It's packed. When you eat dried cranberries, they have a wonderful flavor and they are much more intense than a raw cranberry. And seen here, A.D. Makepeace would actually box them later to be placed into plastic, but dried cranberries were added to the market. There was also Ocean Spray's giant cranberry bottle that was located in Onset, Massachusetts at Route 6 and 28. The massive bottle was built in 1931 adjacent to a small roadside stand that sold refreshing Ocean Spray cranberry cocktail. The bottle only lasted 4 years as it was demolished in 1935. But can you imagine coming down before the advent of the Southeast Expressway to Route 3 to the Cape, coming down through Route 28 to the gates at what is today Wareham that says the gateway to Cape Cod, and seeing this 28-foot high bottle of Ocean Spray cranberry cocktail? Well, you see it in postcard but it was also sold in the stores. And during that period, in the 1940s and 50s, these wonderful color postcards were done to show the historical aspects of harvesting cranberries on Cape Cod. The woman in the foreground uses a Chandler cranberry scoop, placing them into the boxes, and the man on the right actually puts them onto a tip cart where he would bring them to the horse-drawn wagon. But we also see a man here with more tattoos than I've ever seen in my life, with a cranberry scoop, placing them into a wooden box. But of course, on the right-hand side is how they would look as he was scooping them to box them. During the 1960s, Ocean Spray would actually create Cranberry Kitchen, and they did cookbooks that had 22 best fresh cranberry recipes that was sent to you free of charge. You see in some instances there was cranberry bread, cranberry pie, and of course pork chops with the halves of peaches as well as fresh cranberries. But have you ever thought of Spam and cranberries? Make this happy tasting treat tonight. Well, I can't say that I've ever had Spam in my life, but the whole idea was, did cranberries really make it delicious? I'm sure they did. And of course, there was the cranberry frap. Number one, on the upper left-hand side, place a heaping spoonful of vanilla ice cream in the mixing bowl. Number two, fill 2/3 full of cranberry juice cocktail. Number three, beat thoroughly. And we did have that beater in our kitchen right up until the 1980s. And on the right-hand side, serve and enjoy. Well, it must have been delicious. It was just like a frap, but in this instance had the tart cranberry juice. Ocean Spray, seen here with a jelly cranberry sauce can, Americans consume 400 million pounds of cranberry every year. 20% of that amount, or 80 million pounds, are consumed during the week of Thanksgiving. They're indispensable. I don't shop at the supermarket. I go to Route 28 in Yarmouth, where I get a gallon bag of cranberries, and we use them throughout the season. But seen here, as I said earlier, Valentine's Day was something you would have cranberry hearts. Here, brighten the plate with Ocean Spray at Easter time. And you have roast turkey and roast ham. But in the foreground, you have an Easter bunny made out of jellied cranberry, with pimentos for eyes and nose and scallions for his whiskers. And of course, in the summer for Father's Day, let's have a chicken Q. And a chicken Q is like a barbecue, but it's roasted chicken on the grill. And you see here served with jellied cranberry sauce or whole cranberry sauce. It was a great way to actually market it for use throughout the year, but the canning was what made it accessible. Now, during that period, even Pierpont Glass would make this wonderful cup plate. Now, this says Ocean Spray, 1930 to 1980, the 50th anniversary. It is a beautiful cranberry color, but do you notice in the very center, it's a craneberry with a crane, the original German interpretation of what became known as cranberry. These are very collectible today. But during the period of the 1940s, there was a magazine published throughout the country called the National Cranberry Magazine. The cultivated cranberry industry spread to New Jersey by the 1830s, Wisconsin by the 1850s, and the Pacific Northwest by the 1880s. Today, in addition to Massachusetts, the major growers for cranberries are New Jersey, Oregon, Washington, and in the Canadian provinces of British Columbia. Additional regions with cranberry production include Delaware, Maine, Michigan, New York, Rhode Island, as well as the Canadian provinces of New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Ontario, and Prince Edward Island. And to show you on the right-hand side, this is from Ganges, Ohio. They grew Mastadoon cranberries, which again, like the Searles Jumbo, were larger than the New England cranberries. Long Beach Peninsula, Washington State's finest cranberry since 1883. Fresh, juicy, delicious for juicing, sauces, and baking, 5 cents a pound. Advertising was great, but again, much of it was done previous to World War II on the basis of a fresh cranberry. Well, during that period, Eat More, which was the product that actually encouraged people to eat more cranberries, offered on the left-hand side in 1954 a Cadillac convertible. And if you entered, it was so easy. And of course, just name the Cranberry Girl. Well, that Cadillac was given away annually for about a decade. But on the right-hand side was Miss Cranberry Cape Cod. Now, there aren't many women that wear a bikini with waist-high waders going into the cranberry bog to actually take scoops of cranberries. But this was a great publicity photograph because, again, it made cranberries a little more sexy. Darlington Dry Cranberry Harvester, seen here in the foreground, does not flood the cranberry bogs, but harvests the cranberries in a reel type harvester while also trimming the plants. This was something that was used in the 50s and 60s, but it didn't seem as efficient as the flooding of the bogs. And here, cranberries are typically harvested in October. We flood the bogs with water, then use water reel harvesting machines that loosen the cranberries from the vines. And with the small air pockets in the center, the cranberries float to the water's surface. And you realize in that instance that today, cranberry bogs are actually dry for most of the growing season and only flooded at harvest time. When the bogs are flooded, the cranberries are dislodged and float to the top of the water, making it easy to collect them. The vast majority of cranberries are harvested in this way and then are processed to make dried fruit, sauce, and the official beverage of Massachusetts, cranberry juice. A small percentage of cranberry bogs are dry harvested or picked by mechanical harvesters or by hand rather than being flooded. And dry harvested cranberries are usually sold as fresh fruit. Well, seen here with this enormous bog completely flooded and the men with waders up to their hips, you realize that within that 4 to 6 week period of October and early November, millions and millions of cranberries would float to the surface to actually be harvested. Maybe you remember these two men, inspired by Grant Wood's American Gothic. Each television commercial begins with the same fixed shot of Henry Strozier and Justin Hagen up to their knees in floating cranberries. The Gilmore family, where the commercial was filmed, have a cranberry bog in Carver, Massachusetts. So not only do you see the beginning of the cranberry harvest, but you see the end result, which actually includes diet cranberry juice on the right. Well, you could enjoy cranberries, and of course, a nut ice cream sundae might be vanilla ice cream with cranberries that were heated. And in this instance, it was not only sweet but tart, but very flavorful. But during this period, you realize cranberries were used for a variety of things, not just cranberry bread, not just pies, or even, as we would realize, cranberry sauce. Many people combined it with alcohol for a potent libation. Well, this is a cranberry old-fashioned. It had sugar, bitters, whiskey, pure cranberry juice, and of course, the orange rind and fresh cranberries to garnish. Shaken, served, and of course, with 3 cranberries, not olives, on a spear, you realize it was a delicious drink, but it was so different than the regular old-fashioned. A cosmopolitan is something that sometimes I enjoy. It has vodka, triple sec, cranberry juice, fresh lime juice, and a lime slice for garnish. Delicious, potent, but cranberry. And of course, the Cape Codder. It's a cocktail consisting of vodka and cranberry juice. It was originally known as the Red Devil, and rumors that it actually got its start in the bars of Cape Cod in the 1950s. However, there are multiple variations of the drink, starting with the Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy Cape Codder. This cocktail is named after the Kennedy family's matriarch and mother of John F. Kennedy. The recipe is like the traditional Cape Codder, except it also adds club soda for her effervescent attitude. And there was the Scarlett O'Hara. And this, of course, is served in New Orleans, and you realize it's fresh lime juice, cranberry juice, and Southern Comfort. Shake well and served with cracked ice and strained into a glass. These are wonderful things, but if you weren't somebody who enjoyed a glass of alcohol, you might want Celestial Seasons herb teas. And this is from 1985, and it's called Cranberry Cove. Great amount of publicity because these tea bags had tea that was slightly sweet, tangy, and it was perfect anytime. It was also beautifully done in an advertisement. So whether it was an old-fashioned or a Cape Codder or even a cup of herbal cranberry tea, it not only tasted good, but it was making the cranberry more palatable. Well, there are 10 health benefits of cranberries. And this is something that I'm sure each one of you are going to run out immediately and either buy a bag of cranberries or buy some vodka to make a wonderful cranberry libation. Number one, it treats urinary tract infections. Number two, fights cancers. Number three, fights heart disease. Number four, helps kidney and bladder problems. Number five, prevents dental problems. Number six, promotes weight loss. Number seven, anti-aging properties. Number eight, improves mental health. Number nine, strengthens the immune system. And number 10, relieves skin conditions. What a versatile berry. Can blueberries claim this? No, only cranberries. And in some ways, some of them are true. But the whole idea is that in some ways, they have to be taken with a pinch of salt. Well, cranberries may be a tangy and delicious berry, but don't believe that they are just another pretty plant. Cranberries are loaded with health benefits that stretch the whole human body, and researchers are certain that the extent of the cranberries growing as more and more research is done. Cranberries were recognized by the Dietary Guidelines for Americans as a nutrient-dense fruit. So it not only tasted good, but it really was good for you. Well, this slideshow tries to show cranberries, something that we probably take for advantage and just look at in some ways and say, of course, it's going to be an accompaniment for Thanksgiving dinner. But it truly is New England's bounty. And we can realize that even in the latter part of the 18th century, but mostly the 19th and 20th century, cranberries were a part of our economy. And it wasn't just something that was harvested locally, but it would eventually be encouraged to be grown throughout the United States. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed it.